In the sun-baked hills of Montana, where the wind whispers secrets across empty pastures, loneliness can hollow out even the strongest soul. Ellie Caldwell's horse ranch stood like a monument to broken dreams. What began as a thriving family business, built on hope and determination, had withered into a daily reminder of everything she'd lost. But on this blazing August afternoon, as temperatures climbed toward triple digits, fate would deliver an unexpected visitor to her doorstep. This wasn't just any lost child seeking shelter. The tiny toddler carried a handwritten note that would shatter everything Ellie thought she knew about family, sacrifice, and the power of second chances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 4:45 a.m., same as it had every morning for the past 6 years. Ellie Caldwell's weathered hand slammed down on the clock with practiced precision. The queen-sized bed felt cavernous around her slender frame. The empty space beside her, a daily reminder of what fate had stolen from her that terrible spring. Jack had always been an early riser, up before her with coffee brewing and chores already mapped out for the day. His deep laugh would echo through their bedroom as he pulled on his boots, teasing her about needing beauty sleep when she was already the prettiest rancher in 3 counties. Now the house held only silence, broken occasionally by the distant nickering of horses and the creak of century-old timber settling against the Montana wind. Ellie swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet finding the cool hardwood floor. At 38, her body carried the accumulated strain of 2 decades working with horses under the relentless western sun. Her knees protested as she stood, a sharp reminder of the fall she'd taken during last spring's training session with a particularly stubborn quarter horse. Back then, Jack had been there to help her through the recovery, his gentle hands working liniment into her sore muscles, while he whispered stories about their future together. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman who had aged beyond her years. Sun-weathered skin framed hazel eyes that had once sparkled with ambition, but now held the flat exhaustion of someone merely existing. Her chestnut hair, once thick and vibrant, hung limply around her shoulders, streaked with premature silver that she couldn't bring herself to color. Jack had loved those first gray strands, calling them her wisdom highlights, earned through years of building something meaningful together. Downstairs, the kitchen felt like a museum of abandoned hopes. Jack's collection of hand-carved wooden spoons still hung on the wall, each one crafted during the long winter evenings when outdoor work was impossible. His favorite coffee mug, chipped at the handle but never replaced, sat in the cabinet alongside the matching one he'd given her for their 10th anniversary. The refrigerator hummed its lonely song, containing nothing but essentials: eggs from her chickens, milk approaching its expiration date, and leftover stew she'd made too much of, again forgetting she only cooked for one now. Coffee came from a single-serve machine Jack had hated. Tastes like plastic and regret, he'd always said. Ellie measured the grounds with mechanical precision, muscle memory guiding movements while her mind drifted to the endless list of tasks awaiting her. The east pasture fence needed reinforcing before winter. The roof on the smaller stable leaked whenever it rained. 3 of her best mares showed signs of hoof issues that required expensive farrier work. The Caldwell Ranch had once been the pride of Whispering Pines County, spanning nearly 800 acres of prime grazing and training land. Ellie's grandfather had established it as a cattle operation in the 1940s, but her father had pivoted to horses, recognizing the changing market and his daughter's natural gift with the animals. By the time Ellie and Jack took over management, they'd built a reputation for breeding and training some of the finest quarter horses and Appaloosas in the state. Clients from across the country had once traveled to the ranch, seeking Ellie's expertise in training problem horses and Jack's brilliant business acumen. They complemented each other perfectly, She had the magic touch with even the most difficult animals, while he transformed that talent into a sustainable business model. Together, they'd planned to expand into therapeutic writing for children with disabilities, combining Ellie's horse knowledge with Jack's vision for community service. That was before the accident, before the drunk driver on Route 17, before the late-night knock on the door that changed everything. Now Ellie worked the ranch alone, her pride preventing her from selling despite the obvious financial strain. Most of the breeding program had been scaled back, the therapeutic riding center plans abandoned. She kept 15 horses, now a manageable number for one person with occasional help, and focused on basic training services for local clients who remembered what Caldwell Ranch had once been and remained loyal out of respect. She pulled on her work clothes with the same methodical approach she brought to everything these days. Faded Wranglers worn soft at the knees, a flannel shirt despite the August heat, and boots that had walked thousands of miles across this unforgiving landscape. Her worn leather gloves waited by the back door, molded to the shape of her hands through years of gripping reins, mending fences, and carrying feed buckets. The screen door protested as she stepped onto the back porch, another item on her endless repair list. The morning air carried the familiar scent of sage, dust, and the promise of another scorching day. The thermometer mounted beside the door already read 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun hadn't fully cleared the eastern hills. Ellie's morning routine began with feeding the horses, a ritual that connected her to every rancher who had worked this land before her. The 15 horses in her care were divided between 2 pastures and the main barn, each animal with its own personality and needs that she understood instinctively. They gathered at the fence line as she approached, recognizing the sound of her footsteps and the feed bucket she carried. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Morning, gang," she called, her voice sounding strange in the empty dawn. The horses nickered in response, pushing against each other for position. These weren't just livestock but partners in her work, each one representing both income and purpose in a life that sometimes felt devoid of both. Thunder, her personal gelding, a magnificent black Appaloosa with a spotted rump that Jack had given her for their 5th anniversary, occupied the first stall. The horse nudged her shoulder gently as she entered, his soft breath warming her neck in a greeting that felt more genuine than any human interaction she'd had in months. "Hey, handsome," she whispered, running her hand along his powerful neck. "Ready for another day?" Thunder stomped once, as if answering her question, and Ellie felt the familiar ache of talking to an animal because there was no one else to share her thoughts with. Walking the property boundary had become Ellie's form of meditation, a time when she could assess needs while letting her mind wander. Today she found several sections of fence requiring attention before winter brought heavy snow. The repairs would be manageable but added to an already overwhelming list of maintenance issues that accumulated faster than her dwindling savings account could address. In the distance, the main barn stood silhouetted against the brightening sky, its weathered red paint fading to rust in places. Built by her grandfather in 1948, the structure had the solid craftsmanship of an era when things were built to last generations. Ellie's father had maintained it meticulously, teaching her the importance of preventive repairs and respect for the buildings that sheltered their livelihood. Since Jack's death, however, maintenance had become increasingly reactive fixing. Only what broke, and sometimes not even that. Inside the barn, swallows nested in the high beams, their mud homes adding to the sense that this was a place where all creatures could find shelter. The smell of hay, leather, and the sweet musk of horses created an atmosphere that spoke of honest work and simple pleasures. This had always been Ellie's favorite place on the ranch, especially in the golden hour of early morning when light streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny constellations. Marigold, an aging Palomino Mar, who had been one of their first breeding successes, occupied the largest stall. The horse was approaching 20 now, retired from breeding but still magnificent with her golden coat and intelligent eyes. Jack had named her, claiming her color reminded him of the wildflowers Ellie had carried in her wedding bouquet. Now Marigold served as a gentle mount for the occasional beginner lesson, the only part of the therapeutic program Ellie had managed to implement. "Morning, old girl," Ellie murmured, checking the mare's water and adding fresh hay to her manger. Marigold nuzzled Ellie's pocket, knowing from years of routine that a carrot or apple might be hidden there. Today it was a sugar cube a small, luxury that Ellie couldn't bring herself to discontinue, though every expense was carefully calculated these days. By 7:30, the sun had gained enough strength to make work uncomfortable. Ellie retreated to the shade of the barn's interior, wiping sweat from her forehead with a bandana that had once belonged to her father. The silence pressed against her like a physical presence, broken only by the occasional whinny of horses and the persistent buzz of insects that thrived in Montana summer heat. This was when loneliness hit hardest, in the quiet moments between chores when her mind had time to wander. Jack would have been telling one of his ridiculous jokes by now, or planning their next business move with the enthusiastic energy that had balanced her more practical nature. The barn had always echoed with his voice, whether he was singing off-key to the classic country songs on the radio or calling out to the ranch hands they could no longer afford to employ. The house had always been full of visitors in those days. Clients arriving for consultations, friends stopping by with home-baked goods, neighboring ranchers seeking advice or offering help with larger projects. Jack had been the social heart of their operation, making connections that turned into both business opportunities and genuine friendships. Now the phone rarely rang, and when it did, the caller usually wanted payment on overdue bills or was checking if she was finally ready to sell. The social connections that had once defined their life had withered after Jack's death, leaving Ellie isolated in the middle of 800 acres that felt more like a burden than a blessing. She forced herself to focus on immediate tasks rather than dwelling on what couldn't be changed. 3 horses needed exercise today. The tack room required reorganizing. The ancient tractor that helped maintain the pastures needed an oil change before the engine seized completely. The truth was becoming harder to ignore with each passing month. The ranch was dying a slow death, strangled by debt and one woman's stubborn refusal to admit defeat. Logic suggested selling to one of the luxury resort developers that had been circling like vultures, waiting for her resolve to finally crack. The money would pay off the mortgage and leave enough for a comfortable, small-town existence, maybe a little house in town with a couple of acres for Thunder and Marigold to live out their days. But selling felt like betrayal. Her grandfather's calloused hands had cleared this land and built the first structures. Her father had expanded the operation and established the family's reputation for quality horsemanship. Jack had poured his heart into making it not just a business, but a true home, a place where they had planned to raise the children that never came, despite years of trying and medical interventions that drained their savings and left them with nothing but shattered hopes. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted her brooding. Ellie shaded her eyes against the morning sun, watching dust rise from the gravel road that connected her ranch to the county highway. Visitors were rare enough that each one deserved attention, though she hoped it wasn't another bank representative or developer with a final offer that would cost her dignity along with her heritage. The truck turned out to be Miguel Hernandez's white Chevy, its once pristine paint now dulled by years of ranch work. Miguel owned the neighboring property to the west, a successful cattle operation that had been in his family for 3 generations. He'd been Jack's closest friend, and since the accident, he'd become Ellie's most reliable support, stopping by regularly with practical help and the kind of quiet companionship that didn't demand conversation, when silence was easier to bear. "Morning, Ellie," Miguel called as he climbed from the cab. his dark hair showing more silver at the temples than it had a year ago. At 53, he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, his movements, reflecting decades of physical work that had kept him fit despite the passing years. "Miguel," Ellie nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of gratitude and discomfort that accompanied his visits. His kindness was genuine, but it always reminded her how much her life had changed, how dependent she'd become on the goodwill of others. Despite her fierce desire for self-sufficiency. "Brought those specialized feed supplements we talked about," he said, gesturing to several bags in his truck bed. "The distributor had a bulk discount. Figured you might want to try them for that." Mare with the digestive issues. It was a transparent excuse to help. The supplements were expensive, something Miguel knew she'd hesitate to purchase for herself, but couldn't refuse when presented as a neighborly bargain. This was his way, always finding the balance between assistance and respect for her pride. "Coffee's fresh," Ellie said by way of thanks, gesturing toward the house. The invitation was their routine, a way to acknowledge his help without the awkwardness of direct gratitude. They walked toward the house together, two ranchers bound by shared history and mutual respect, despite their different circumstances. Miguel's operation was thriving, benefiting from his 3 adult sons who had all returned to the family business after college. His wife Carmen ran a successful side business selling handmade Western wear to tourists in the nearby resort town. In contrast, Ellie's isolation and financial struggles were obvious to anyone who knew what Caldwell Ranch had once been. In the kitchen, Ellie poured coffee into mismatched mugs, while Miguel discreetly glanced at the pile of mail on the counter, mostly bills and bank notices that she'd been avoiding. The silence stretched between them, comfortable in its familiarity, yet tinged with unspoken concerns. "Roof on the small stable still leaking?" Miguel asked finally, his tone carefully casual. Ellie nodded, unable to meet his eyes. The repair was necessary but required materials and labor she couldn't afford right now. "Got some patches holding for the moment. I'll tackle it properly before winter." Miguel sipped his coffee, choosing his next words with obvious care. "My boys are looking for some extra work this month. College bills coming due. They were wondering if you'd let them help with the roof and some of the fence work. Training exchange, maybe. You could give Louise some pointers with that new stallion of his, the one that's giving him fits during trailer loading." It was another kindness disguised as mutual benefit. Miguel's sons were all accomplished horsemen who didn't need her training. Advice, but the fiction allowed her to accept help without feeling like charity. "I might take them up on that," Ellie said, surprising herself by entertaining the offer. A year ago, she would have refused outright, but reality was becoming harder to deny. The ranch was too much for one person, regardless of how determined that person might be. Miguel nodded, relief briefly crossing his weathered features before he masked it. "Just let me know when. They're eager to learn from the best horse trainer in the county." The compliment hung between them, an uncomfortable reminder of what she had once been, what the ranch had represented before grief and financial pressure had dimmed its promise. Ellie changed the subject, asking about Miguel's cattle and the new irrigation system his sons had installed last spring. Their conversation continued for another half hour, touching on county news, weather predictions, and the rising cost of veterinary care. It was the most substantial human interaction Ellie had experienced in weeks, a fact that might have depressed her if she'd allowed herself to dwell on it. As Miguel prepared to leave, he paused at the door, his expression serious. "Ellie, I know it's not my place, but I worry about you out here alone." "Jack wouldn't want." "I know what Jack would want," she interrupted, more sharply than intended. Then, softening her tone, "I appreciate your concern, Miguel. I really do, but I'm managing." He nodded, accepting the boundary she'd established. "Well, the offer stands for the boys to help with repairs. Just call when you're ready." After Miguel's departure, Ellie stood on the porch watching his truck disappear down the long driveway, dust settling in its wake. The encounter had left her feeling both supported and somehow diminished, grateful for his friendship, yet resentful of her own circumstances that made such help necessary. The afternoon stretched before her with more tasks than hours to complete. The isolation that had once felt like grief's appropriate companion, now seemed like a self-imposed prison. Jack's voice echoed in her memory. "A ranch isn't just land and animals, darling. It's community. No one makes it alone out here." He'd been right, of course. The independent rancher was largely a myth, a romantic notion that ignored the reality of interdependence that had always characterized life in rural Montana. Her grandparents had relied on neighboring families during difficult seasons. Her parents had participated in county-wide barn raisings and cattle drives. Even at the height of their success, she and Jack had been embedded in a network of mutual support with other ranching families. Somewhere along the way, grief had convinced her that isolation was strength, that refusing help somehow honored Jack's memory. Standing on the porch of a house that increasingly felt like a monument to what she'd lost rather than a home with future possibilities, Ellie wondered if she'd been wrong all along. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks: exercising horses, mending tack, checking fences in the west pasture where a section had been damaged during the last thunderstorm. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising relief from the heat but creating urgency to complete outdoor work before rain arrived. Ellie was leading the last horse back to the barn when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she hurried through the final feeding, making sure all animals were secure before the storm hit in earnest. The temperature dropped rapidly as wind picked up, bending the tall grass and waves across the pasture, and rattling the weather vane atop the main barn. Inside, the barn felt safe and solid, built to withstand Montana's mercurial weather. Ellie checked each stall one final time, speaking softly to nervous horses as lightning flashed outside and thunder boomed overhead. The building had weathered countless storms since her grandfather's time, its sturdy timber frame and stone foundation a testament to craftsmanship that prioritized permanence over economy. As rain pounded against the roof, Ellie settled onto a hay bale, reluctant to make the dash to the house through what had become a genuine downpour. The storms had always been Jack's favorite weather. He'd stand on the porch watching lightning dance across the valley, counting seconds between flash and thunder to track the storm's distance. Nature's fireworks, he'd called it, finding beauty in the very forces that could threaten their livelihood. The memory brought a smile instead of the usual stab of grief, progress of a sort, though the journey through loss had been neither linear nor predictable. 6 years had softened the sharpest edges of her pain, allowing occasional moments when remembering Jack brought comfort rather than renewed anguish. As the storm intensified, Ellie was grateful for the barn's solid construction. Rain hammered against the roof with increasing force, and wind howled around the eaves with a sound almost like human crying. She frowned, listening more carefully. The horses were settled, accustomed to storms. The wind was strong but not unusual for a summer thunderstorm. There it was again, a sound distinct from the storm's natural symphony. A whimper, then a full-throated wail that was unmistakably human and unmistakably young. Ellie stood, her heart suddenly racing. The barn door remained secured against the weather. All stalls were occupied by their equine residents. No vehicles had approached. The sound of tires on gravel would have been audible even above the storm. Moving cautiously toward the sound, Ellie followed the crying to the back of the barn where old feed storage bins lined the wall. The noise grew louder, emanating from behind the largest bin. Taking a deep breath, Ellie peered around the corner, unprepared for what she found. A small child, perhaps 2 years old, sat huddled against the wall, soaking wet and shivering violently. dark curls plastered against a tear-stained face, tiny hands clutching what appeared to be a stuffed rabbit worn threadbare with love. The toddler wore only thin pajamas decorated with cartoon dinosaurs, completely inadequate for the storm's chill. "Oh my God," Ellie breathed, dropping to her knees beside the child. "Hey there, sweetheart. You're okay now. You're safe." The toddler's cries subsided slightly at her gentle tone, huge brown eyes regarding her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. A boy, Ellie realized, though it was hard to tell beneath the mud and tears. "How did you get in here, little one?" she asked, though she expected no coherent answer from a child so young. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more alarming than the last. The ranch was miles from the nearest neighbor, accessible only by the long private road. No one could have accidentally wandered here, especially not a toddler alone. Had someone left this child deliberately? Was someone searching for him nearby, perhaps a parent separated during the storm? Gently, Ellie reached toward the boy, expecting him to shrink away. Instead, he launched himself into her arms with the trusting desperation of a child who had reached the limits of his courage. His small body trembled against hers, cold and frightened, but apparently uninjured. "It's okay," she murmured, wrapping him in her flannel overshirt. "You're safe now. We'll figure this out." As she shifted the child in her arms, something crinkled against his chest. Carefully, Ellie extracted a folded piece of paper that had been tucked inside his pajama top. With one arm still holding the boy securely, she unfolded the note with her free hand, her breath catching as she read the carefully printed words. "His name is Noah. Please love him like I couldn't. He deserves better than what I can give." The simple message hit Ellie with physical force. No contact information. No explanation beyond those two devastating sentences. Just a child, Noah, and a plea that simultaneously acknowledged parental failure and hoped for something better. Ellie looked down at the boy who had stopped crying and now clung to her with complete trust, his head heavy against her shoulder as exhaustion began to overtake fear. In that moment, the enormity of what had happened, what someone had done, struck her fully. Someone had left their child in her barn during a thunderstorm, with nothing but pajamas, a stuffed rabbit, and a note asking a stranger to love him better than they could. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a temporary situation or a misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately chosen her ranch, had somehow entered the barn undetected, and had left their toddler with the explicit intention of not returning. Ellie's first instinct was to call the authorities immediately. This was abandonment, a criminal act. The child needed medical attention, proper documentation, appropriate placement through official channels. But as rain continued to pound against the roof and Noah's breathing began to even out as he drifted toward sleep in her arms, Ellie found herself hesitating. The note's words echoed in her mind. "Please love him like I couldn't. He deserves better than what I can give." Of all the places someone could have left a child, why her isolated ranch? How had they even accessed the barn without her knowledge? And most puzzling of all, why would anyone believe she, a grieving widow struggling to maintain a failing ranch, could provide a better life for a child? As these questions swirled unanswered, Ellie made a decision. The storm was too intense to travel safely, even the short distance to her house. Noah was exhausted, but appeared physically unharmed. The authorities could wait until morning. Tonight, this child needed warmth, food, and safety, all things she could provide immediately. "Let's get you warmed up and fed," she whispered to the drowsy toddler. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what happens next." Using the emergency supplies she kept in the barn, Ellie created a makeshift bed from clean horse blankets in the small tack room. She changed Noah into an old T-shirt of hers comically, large on his tiny frame but clean and dry. The protein bars and bottled water from her emergency kit weren't ideal for a toddler, but Noah ate hungrily, confirming her suspicion that he hadn't been fed recently. As the storm continued its assault outside, Ellie sat beside the sleeping child, the note clutched in her hand, her mind racing with implications and possibilities she had never anticipated when she woke that morning. Whatever came next, she knew with absolute certainty that her carefully isolated existence had just been irrevocably disrupted. And somewhere beneath the shock and confusion, a feeling Ellie had thought long buried began to stir the maternal instinct that years of infertility and loss had taught her to suppress. Looking at Noah's peaceful sleeping face, one tiny hand still clutching his rabbit, while the other held firmly to her finger, Ellie felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen since the day she buried both Jack and their dreams of parenthood. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she whispered, though the answer was already forming in her heart, as inevitable and powerful as the storm that had delivered him to her door. The storm raged throughout the night, but Ellie barely noticed as she maintained her vigil beside the sleeping toddler. Every few minutes, she found herself checking that Noah was still breathing, his small chest rising and falling beneath the oversized t-shirt that served as a makeshift nightgown. By dawn, the thunder had retreated to distant rumbles, and rain had gentled to a steady patter against the barn roof. Morning light filtered through high windows, casting a golden glow over the child's face. Noah stirred, tiny fists rubbing sleep from his eyes as he oriented himself to unfamiliar surroundings. The moment of confusion was brief before his gaze found Ellie, and a smile startling in its brightness transformed his face. "Hi," he said, the single word carrying more trust than Ellie felt she deserved from this abandoned child. "Good morning, Noah," she replied, surprised he responded to the name, so that part of the note was accurate, at least. "Hungry," he announced, sitting up and clutching his stuffed rabbit to his chest. The toy was well loved, missing one eye, and patched in several places with different colored threads, evidence of someone who had cared enough to repeatedly repair a cherished comfort object. "Let's get you some proper breakfast," Ellie said, gathering him into her arms. The storm had passed, leaving behind that particular freshness that followed summer rain. Puddles dotted the path to the house, reflecting cloud-scattered sky in miniature mirrors. Noah pointed excitedly at a rainbow arching across the eastern horizon. "Pretty." "Very pretty," Ellie agreed, surprised by the child's vocabulary. His speech seemed advanced for his apparent age, another puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the abandonment scenario. Inside the house, Ellie settled Noah at the kitchen table, improvising a booster seat from cushions. He watched with solemn attention as she prepared oatmeal with cinnamon and the last of her fresh berries, his eyes tracking her movements around the kitchen, as if memorizing her patterns. "What's your bunny's name?" Ellie asked, setting the bowl before him and helping guide his small hand around a spoon. "Hop," Noah said decisively, propping the rabbit carefully against the sugar bowl. "Hop hungry too." Ellie played along, preparing a tiny portion in a teacup for the stuffed animal. Noah beamed with approval, then attacked his own breakfast with enthusiasm that suggested he hadn't eaten well recently. He was remarkably coordinated for his age, handling the spoon with minimal spillage and even saying please when requesting more milk. As Noah ate, Ellie studied him more carefully in the clear morning light. His dark curls, now dried fluffy and untamed, framed a face with warm brown skin and striking amber-flecked eyes. No visible bruises or signs of neglect beyond hunger. His dinosaur pajamas, though damp and muddy, were of good quality. The mystery deepened with each observation that contradicted her initial assumptions about a desperate abandonment. "Noah, did your mommy bring you here?" she asked gently. The boy nodded, spooning another bite of oatmeal. "Mommy sad. Noah be good here." The simple statement lodged in Ellie's chest like a physical weight. What circumstances would lead a mother to leave her articulate, apparently well-cared-for toddler with a stranger, believing it was the better option? After breakfast, Ellie faced her first parenting challenge: how to clean and dress a toddler with no child-sized clothing available. She settled for a makeshift bath in the kitchen sink, which Noah found hilarious, splashing and giggling as she carefully washed away the mud and fierce sweat from the night before. Drying him with a soft towel, Ellie improvised an outfit from an old t-shirt of Jack's, knotting it creatively to keep it from dragging. The result was absurdly large but clean and serviceable until she could figure out next steps. "You look very handsome," she told him seriously, which made him giggle and twirl, showing off his new outfit with the uncomplicated joy that only very young children possess. The phone on the kitchen wall, an old landline she kept because cell reception was spotty at best, seemed to grow more prominent as the morning progressed. Ellie knew she needed to call the authorities. Abandoned children required official intervention, proper channels, trained professionals, not grieving widows with failing ranches and no childcare experience. Yet each time she approached the phone, Noah would do something that stopped her, asking her to read from an ancient cookbook he'd discovered, carefully showing Hop how to pet thunder through the corral fence, or simply reaching for her hand with complete trust as they walked the morning perimeter check. By noon, Ellie had convinced herself that one day wouldn't make a difference. Noah was safe, fed, and apparently content. The county sheriff's office was understaffed on weekends. Monday would be soon enough to navigate the complications of explaining a child abandoned in her barn. One day to think. One day to understand what the note really meant before setting in motion a process she couldn't control. The decision to temporarily postpone official intervention created an unexpected bubble of freedom, a strange holiday from normal life where Ellie found herself rediscovering her ranch through Noah's wonder-filled eyes. The ordinary became extraordinary as he marveled at horses, chickens, the ancient windmill that still pumped water to the north pasture, and even the rusty tractor that had sat unused since Jack's death. "Fix?" Noah asked, patting the tractor's massive wheel with surprising gentleness. "It's broken," Ellie explained, something shifting inside her as she heard the defeated tone in her own voice. Noah considered this with impressive seriousness for a 2-year-old. "We fix," he decided confidently. "Noah, help." The simple optimism hit Ellie with unexpected force. When had she stopped believing things could be fixed? When had maintenance become something to avoid rather than a natural part of ranch life? On impulse, Ellie lifted Noah onto the tractor seat, where he gripped the massive steering wheel with delight. "Vroom," he declared, making engine noises that dissolved into giggles when Ellie pretended the tractor was moving. The game expanded. As the afternoon progressed, Noah driving, while Ellie described imaginary journeys around the ranch, fixing fences and helping neighbors. His attention span was remarkable, his imagination vivid as he added details to their shared story. They were halfway through an elaborate narrative about rescuing a neighbor's lost calf when the sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their play. Ellie's heart sank as she recognized Sheriff Kate Lawson's patrol SUV coming up the drive. Someone must have seen her with Noah during their morning perimeter walk. In a community as small as Whispering Pines, unusual sightings traveled faster than official reports. "Looks like we have company," Ellie told Noah, lifting him from the tractor seat. "Let's go say hello." Sheriff Lawson was already out of her vehicle by the time they approached, her expression a careful neutral that didn't quite hide her curiosity. At 45, Kate had served the county for over 20 years, her no-nonsense competence earning her repeated re-elections, even in a community that initially balked at a female sheriff. "Afternoon, Ellie," Kate said, her gaze moving to Noah, who had suddenly turned shy, pressing against Ellie's leg and peering up at the uniformed stranger. "Didn't know you had company." "It's a recent development," Ellie replied, resting her hand protectively on Noah's curls. "This is Noah." "Hi there, Noah," Kate said, crouching to the boy's level with the ease of someone accustomed to interacting with children. That's a mighty fine rabbit you've got there. Noah's grip on Hop tightened, but he managed a whispered "thank you" that made both women smile. Miguel mentioned seeing you with a little one during his morning patrol, Kate explained, straightening. Thought I'd check in, seeing as I wasn't aware of any family visiting. Of course it had been Miguel who reported the child's presence. Her neighbor wouldn't have meant harm, quite the opposite. In a community where everyone watched out for each other, an unfamiliar child appearing suddenly at a widow's isolated ranch would naturally raise concerns. It's complicated, Ellie said, suddenly aware of how suspicious the situation must appear. Maybe we could talk inside? I've got lemonade in the fridge. In the kitchen, while Noah contentedly arranged wooden spoons in a pattern only he understood, Ellie explained the previous night's events, the storm, finding Noah behind the feed bins, and the note that still felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. Kate listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When Ellie finally produced the note, the sheriff read it twice before setting it carefully on the table between them. You should have called immediately, Kate sighed, though her tone held more concern than accusation. Child abandonment is a serious matter, Ellie. There are protocols, agencies equipped to handle these situations. I know, Ellie admitted. I was going to call first thing Monday. He seemed safe, well fed for the moment. I just needed a little time to understand what happened. Kate's gaze softened slightly. Any ideas about who might have left him? Ellie shook her head. None. The ranch is isolated, you know that. No neighbors would need to abandon a child. They'd know they could ask for help directly. And you saw no vehicles, heard nothing over the storm? Nothing. Whoever left him knew the ranch layout well enough to access the barn undetected. During a thunderstorm. Kate frowned, making notes in her official notebook. That suggests local knowledge. Or at least someone who's been here before. She glanced at Noah, who was now feeding his rabbit with an empty spoon. He seems comfortable with you. No signs of distress beyond what you'd expect from the situation. He's remarkably adaptable, Ellie agreed, and verbal for his age. Follows simple instructions, understands context. Someone invested time in his development. Which makes the abandonment even more puzzling, Kate concluded. This doesn't present like typical desperation cases, drug addiction, severe poverty, mental health crisis. Those children often show signs of neglect well before abandonment occurs. They watched Noah for a moment, both struck by the contradiction between his apparent good care and his abandonment. I'll need to take him in, Kate said finally, though she sounded reluctant. Protocol requires medical examination, placement with emergency foster services while we investigate. The words sent an unexpected pang through Ellie's chest, sharper than anticipated for a child she'd known less than 24 hours. I understand, she said, working to keep her voice neutral. Do you need me to help gather his things? Kate's eyebrows rose slightly. Things? I thought he arrived with just the pajamas and rabbit. Well, yes, Ellie admitted. But we've been playing with some toys I found in the attic, Jack's old building blocks. And he's really taken to that. Blue blanket on the couch. Might help him feel more secure during the transition. Understanding dawned in Kate's eyes. Ellie, have you considered that you might be getting attached? This isn't a stray puppy. There are legal implications, investigations, potential family members with rights. The system exists to protect children like Noah. Does it? The question escaped before Ellie could censor herself. Does the system really protect children, Kate? Because I've heard enough stories to wonder. The sheriff sighed, closing her notebook. It's imperfect. I won't pretend otherwise. But it's what we have, and I'm obligated to follow procedure. She paused, studying Ellie's face. Unless you're suggesting an alternative? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Ellie glanced at Noah, who had abandoned his spoon game and was now watching them intently, somehow sensing the conversation's importance. What if I kept him? Ellie said finally, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. Temporarily, I mean. While you investigate. He's settled here, Kate. Moving him again means another trauma, more strangers, another adjustment. You're suggesting emergency foster placement? With you? Kate's tone was carefully neutral, but her expression suggested she was genuinely considering the possibility. There are procedures for that too, Ellie. Home studies, background checks, training requirements. All of which would eventually move Noah somewhere else. To people who never met him before, Ellie pointed out. Wouldn't it be better for him to stay in one place while you figure out what happened? Who left him and why? Noah chose that moment to approach, rabbit clutched in one arm as he reached for Ellie's hand with the other. Outside now? See horses? The simple request, the trusting way he assumed Ellie would take him to see the animals as promised earlier tightened something in her chest. This child, abandoned by someone who supposedly loved him, still believed in the reliability of human promises. Kate observed the interaction, her expression softening. You've always had a way with strays, she said finally. Human ones too, if I recall correctly. The reference to Jack wasn't lost on Ellie. Her late husband had indeed been something of a stray when they first met, a rodeo rider with no fixed address and a reputation for wild living. The ranch had given him purpose, and their marriage had provided the stability his childhood had lacked. I'm not suggesting anything permanent, Ellie clarified, though something inside her whispered otherwise. Just a pause before we uproot him again. You investigate, I keep him safe and settled. If family is found or better options emerge, we revisit. Kate drummed her fingers on the table, visibly weighing options against regulations. I'd be bending a lot of rules, she said finally. Emergency kinship placement requires actual kinship. Temporary guardianship without that relationship is a legal gray area at best. Since when has that stopped you? Ellie challenged gently. Remember the Wilson brothers during that blizzard 3 winters back? Pretty sure housing runaway teenagers for 2 weeks without notifying state authorities was bending rules too. A reluctant smile tugged at Kate's mouth. That was different. They were 17, and it was literally unsafe to transport them during the storm. And it's emotionally unsafe to move Noah right now, Ellie countered. One trauma is enough for a 2-year-old, don't you think? Their gazes held across the table, the history of their long acquaintance informing the silent negotiation. Kate had known Ellie since high school, had stood beside her at Jack's funeral, had checked on her regularly during those first devastating months of grief. This wasn't just a sheriff and a citizen discussing protocols. It was 2 women who understood that official procedures sometimes failed to account for human needs. 3 days, Kate said finally. I'll give you 3 days while I investigate through official channels. We'll classify it as temporary emergency placement due to special circumstances. But Ellie, her expression turned serious. If family is located or clear abandonment is established, we proceed by the book. No arguments, no delays. Relief flooded through Ellie, followed immediately by a new anxiety. 3 days seemed simultaneously too short to prepare for losing Noah, and too long to pretend this arrangement wasn't affecting her more deeply than it should. Agreed, she said, forcing certainty into her voice. 3 days. Kate stood, gathering her notebook and the note, which she carefully sealed in an evidence bag. I'll need to document his presence and condition, she said, shifting into official mode. Photos for the file, basic health assessment, standard procedure. The documentation process was mercifully brief. Noah cooperated with surprising patience. As Kate photographed him from multiple angles, recorded his approximate height and weight, and noted identifying features like the small birthmark behind his right ear. Healthy weight for his age, good muscle tone, no visible signs of malnutrition or physical abuse, Kate dictated into her official recorder. Subject demonstrates age-appropriate language skills and motor coordination. Emotional state appears stable considering circumstances. When the formalities were complete, Kate knelt to Noah's level one last time. "I'll be checking on you, little man," she said with genuine warmth. "You be good for Miss Ellie, okay?" Noah nodded solemnly, then surprised both women by stepping forward to pat Kate's shoulder comfortingly. "You come back," he said, half question and half instruction. "I will," Kate promised, visibly touched by the gesture. At the door, she turned to Ellie with a final warning. "I'm trusting you on this. Don't make me regret bending the rules." "I won't," Ellie assured her. "And Kate?" "Thank you." After the sheriff's departure, a strange quiet settled over the house, not the empty silence Ellie had grown accustomed to, but a different quality of stillness, full of potential and new purpose. Noah looked up at her expectantly, rabbit-clutched. To his chest. "Horses now?" he asked hopefully. Ellie smiled, realizing that for the first time in years, she was genuinely looking forward to the hours ahead rather than simply enduring them. "Yes, horses now, and then we need to make a trip to town. You need proper clothes, and I think Hop might like a friend, don't you?" Noah's face lit with excitement, and Ellie felt something inside her shift and resettle, a piece of herself that had been out of alignment for 6 long years, finally finding its proper place. 3 days might not be much, but she was suddenly determined to make them count. The trip to Whispering Pines' modest downtown area became Ellie's first lesson in the logistical challenges of caring for a toddler. Simple tasks like securing Noah in her truck became complicated puzzles without proper equipment. She improvised a makeshift booster seat from blankets and drove with exaggerated caution, hyper-aware of her precious cargo. Noah watched the passing landscape with fascination, pointing out cows, tractors, and hawks circling overhead with exclamations that made Ellie see her familiar surroundings through new eyes. By the time they reached Main Street, her cheeks ached from smiling more than she had in years. The town's reaction to Ellie Caldwell appearing with a toddler was exactly what she'd expected in a community where gossip traveled faster than light. Heads turned as they entered Ruby's general store, curious gazes following them down aisles as Ellie selected small t-shirts, tiny jeans, and miniature sneakers from the limited children's section. Ruby Henderson herself appeared as they approached. The checkout, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in its customary bun, shrewd eyes taking in every detail of the unusual situation. "Well now," Ruby said, directing her comment to Noah rather than Ellie. "Aren't you just the handsomest little man to visit my store this week?" Noah, who had been clinging shyly to Ellie's leg, straightened at the compliment. "Thank you," he replied with the careful politeness that continued to surprise Ellie. "Getting clothes. I can see that," Ruby agreed seriously. "Very important business, clothes shopping." She glanced at Ellie, questions evident in her expression but tactfully unasked. "Anything else you folks need today?" Ellie hesitated, then decided that Ruby's 4 decades as the town's primary merchant had likely equipped her with useful knowledge. Children's books, and maybe toys for a 2-year-old? Ruby's face softened. "Got a nice selection in the back corner. Educational toys, building blocks, some picture books. Added them last year when my granddaughter was born." She leaned closer, dropping her voice. "And between us, the toy basket under the window has items that aren't exactly in mint condition returned or slightly damaged. I sell them at half price. Might be useful for temporary situations." The careful phrasing confirmed Ellie's suspicion that Kate had already made calls, setting the town's unofficial information network in motion. In small communities like Whispering Pines, emergency fostering situations were handled with a delicate balance of official procedures and neighborly support. "Thank you," Ellie said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "That would be perfect." By the time they finished shopping, Noah had acquired a wardrobe of practical play clothes, a stack of gently used picture books, and a small collection of toys that Ruby had mysteriously discounted because it's Tuesday. The total was still sobering for Ellie's tight budget, but watching Noah's careful wonder as he held his very first own toy truck made every penny seem worthwhile. As they loaded purchases into the truck, Maggie Chun from the diner across the street hurried over, carrying a paper bag that emitted tempting aromas. "Thought you might need some lunch," Maggie said, presenting the bag as if the unsolicited delivery was completely normal. "Grilled cheese for the little one, my Joey loved those at that age. And your usual turkey sandwich on the house today." Before Ellie could protest, Sarah Miller from the pharmacy appeared with a small plastic bag. "Basic first aid supplies," she explained briskly. "Children his age are accident magnets. Band-aids. With dinosaurs, children's fever reducer, that sort of thing. Put it on my monthly donation tab." Overwhelmed by the unsolicited support, Ellie found herself blinking back unexpected tears. For 6 years, she had kept the community at arm's length, convinced that independence was strength and isolation was the appropriate companion to grief. Now, in the space of a single morning, those carefully constructed walls were crumbling. Under the simple kindness of neighbors who had apparently been waiting patiently for her to need them again. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, voice rough with emotion. "Don't need to say anything," Ruby replied, appearing beside them with a final package, a child-sized cowboy hat that she placed carefully on Noah's curls. "That's what community means, Ellie Caldwell. Not just sharing the good times, but carrying each other through the hard ones too." The drive home was quieter, Noah drowsy from excitement and a full stomach. He clutched his new truck in one hand and Hop in the other, head nodding as he fought sleep. Ellie found herself checking the rearview mirror every few minutes, still amazed by the child's presence in her truck, in her life. 3 days suddenly seemed both precious and terrifying. What would happen when Kate's investigation concluded? What if Noah's mother was found? Or worse, what if she wasn't, and Noah was placed in the foster system Ellie had heard too many concerning stories about? For 6 years, Ellie had lived day to day, focusing on basic survival without future plans or dreams, beyond keeping the ranch afloat another month. Now, watching Noah finally surrender to sleep in his makeshift car seat, she found herself thinking about next week, next month, next year, imagining a future that included a child's laughter in rooms that had been silent too long. It was dangerous thinking. 3 days was all she'd been promised. Anything beyond that was speculation that would only lead to fresh heartbreak when Noah inevitably moved on to whatever future the system determined was appropriate. Yet as they turned onto the ranch's long drive, Ellie couldn't help noticing how right it felt to have Noah with her, how the property itself seemed to welcome his presence, as if the land had been waiting for a child's wonder to make it truly alive again. 3 days, she reminded herself firmly. Just 3 days to help a lost child feel safe while proper arrangements were made. But watching Noah wake as the truck stopped, his sleepy smile at recognizing they were home, already lodging in her heart like a promise she hadn't intended to make, Ellie knew she was already past the point where losing him wouldn't devastate her all over again. The first night with Noah properly settled in the house revealed challenges Ellie hadn't anticipated. After a day filled with shopping, meeting neighbors, and exploring the ranch, the toddler resisted bedtime with surprising determination. The carefully arranged guest room hastily converted with borrowed toddler rails for the bed, and nightlights from Ruby's store might as well have been filled with monsters for how vigorously Noah protested being placed there. No sleep alone, he insisted, tears welling in his amber eyes as he clutched Hop in his new truck. Noah, stay with Ellie. After 3 failed attempts at the proper sleeping arrangement, Ellie surrendered. She found herself creating a nest of blankets beside her own bed, where Noah finally settled with a contented sigh that tugged at something deep in her chest. "Story?" he asked hopefully, his small face serious above the blue blanket he'd claimed as his own. Ellie selected one of the picture books Ruby had recommended, a tale about a lost foal finding a new home with a kind farmer. As she read, Noah's eyes grew heavy, his breathing gradually evening into sleep. Even then, one small hand maintained its grip on the edge of her nightgown, as if ensuring she couldn't disappear while he slept. Long after Noah surrendered to dreams, Ellie found herself watching him sleep, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the fan of dark lashes against his skin, the way his curls formed perfect spirals at his temples. 2 days remained of their agreed arrangement. 48 hours that would pass too quickly, leaving an emptiness she was already dreading. "This is dangerous," she whispered to herself, echoing the warning Kate had tried to convey. Attachment to a child who would almost certainly be placed elsewhere could only lead to fresh heartbreak. Yet watching Noah's peaceful sleep, Ellie recognized that the danger had been present from the first moment she found him in the barn. This child, abandoned with nothing but pajamas and a note, had somehow already claimed space in a heart she'd thought permanently closed after Jack's death. Sleep eventually claimed her, but dawn arrived too soon, heralded by a small finger poking her cheek and a voice asking with surprising cheer, "Breakfast now. Horses after?" The second day established routines that felt impossibly natural. Noah helped feed chickens, carefully carrying a small cup of grain that mostly reached its destination. He supervised horse feeding from the safety of Ellie's arms, solemnly informing each animal that they were very good and eating nice. His vocabulary expanded hourly, absorbing ranch terminology with the effortless learning capacity of the very young. By afternoon, Ellie found herself tackling maintenance tasks long postponed, Noah helping with solemn concentration. They repaired a chicken coop gate, Noah handing her tools with surprising accuracy when she named them. They reorganized the tack room, where Noah demonstrated an impressive ability to match items by type and size. Even laundry became an adventure, as Noah sorted clothes into piles, delighting in the simple physics of soap bubbles and the miracle of the spin cycle. When Miguel appeared unannounced in late afternoon, firewood stacked in his truck bed despite the summer heat, Ellie wasn't even surprised. The community network was clearly operational, discreetly providing support without overwhelming her independence. "Thought you might need this come winter," he explained, though they both knew the delivery was merely an excuse to check on the situation. Kate had undoubtedly briefed him about. Carmen sent along some of Luce's old clothes, too. "Our grandson outgrew them last month." Noah, initially shy with the new visitor, warmed quickly when Miguel showed him how to feed sugar cubes to Thunder properly, flat palm and straight fingers to protect against accidental nips. The boy's delighted giggle when the horse's whiskers tickled his hand echoed across the paddock, causing both adults to smile reflexively. "He's settling in well," Miguel observed, watching Noah carefully stroke Thunder's nose with newfound confidence. "For someone abandoned in a storm, he's remarkably resilient," Ellie agreed. "Kate's investigating, but so far there's been no report of a missing child matching his description." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "Carmen thinks he might be from one of the migrant worker families that pass through during harvest. Some are undocumented, afraid to access official support systems." The theory made a certain sense. It might explain why Noah's mother felt she couldn't keep him, but also believed he deserved better than what she could provide. It might even explain how she knew about the ranch, if she'd worked nearby during previous seasons. But to leave him with no way to check he's safe, no contact information. Ellie couldn't reconcile that level of separation with the obvious care evident in Noah's development. "Desperation makes difficult choices seem reasonable," Miguel said quietly. "Remember the Rodriguez family? 3 children under 5, living in that old trailer behind the orchard? Father deported, mother working 3 jobs, sometimes loving. Your child means recognizing when you can't provide what they need." The perspective hit Ellie with unexpected force. She had been viewing the abandonment primarily as trauma inflicted on Noah, Miguel's words, suggested another dimension, a mother's sacrifice rather than abandonment, a desperate hope rather than desertion. "Will you keep him?" Miguel asked. Directly, never one to dance around difficult questions. "If they don't find family?" "I don't know," Ellie admitted, the question triggering anxiety she'd been suppressing. "I'm hardly ideal parent material. Single, financially stretched, no experience with children. The state would probably place him with a two-parent family, someone younger, more stable." Miguel's expression suggested disagreement, but he merely nodded toward Noah, who was now demonstrating to Thunder how his toy truck worked, explaining the mechanics with toddler seriousness. Sometimes the right family isn't about paperwork qualifications. It's about where a soul feels at home. The observation lingered as evening approached, coloring Ellie's perception of ordinary moments, Noah helping set the table with careful precision, his spontaneous hugs whenever she completed a task he approved of, the way he had already adopted her habit of thanking the animals for their contribution to ranch life. The bedtime routine went more smoothly, though Noah still insisted on sleeping near Ellie rather than in the guest room. As he drifted off, she found herself whispering promises she had no business making, that he was safe, that she would protect him, that tomorrow would bring new adventures they would face together. 2/3 of their allotted time had passed. Tomorrow would bring decisions she wasn't ready to face. The third day dawned with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon, matching Ellie's unsettled mood. By breakfast, rain pattered against the windows, transforming the day's plans from outdoor adventures to indoor activities. Noah accepted the change with surprising adaptability, eagerly helping Ellie sort through boxes of Jack's old childhood. Toys that had been stored in the attic since her in-laws' passing. The treasures they discovered created a bridge between past and present wooden blocks Jack had played with as a boy, now arranged in elaborate structures under Noah's direction. A miniature ranch set complete with hand-carved animals that became the setting for stories Noah created with impressive imagination. Photo albums that prompted questions about the smiling man who appeared beside Ellie in countless images. "Who's that?" Noah asked, pointing to Jack's face in their wedding photo. "That's Jack," Ellie said, surprised by how easily she could say his name now. "He lived here with me before." Noah studied the photograph with toddler intensity. Where Jack now? The simple question would have devastated Ellie a year ago. Now faced with Noah's innocent curiosity, she found herself explaining death in terms a 2-year-old might grasp. "Jack died," she said gently. "That means his body stopped working, and he couldn't stay here anymore. But the love we had for each other didn't die. It's still here in this house, in the ranch, in the memories." Noah considered this with surprising thoughtfulness. "Jack sad to go?" "Yes," Ellie admitted, throat tightening. "We were both very sad about it." "Noah sad too," he said, leaning against her side in a gesture of solidarity that nearly undid her composure. "Mommy sad when she went." The statement froze Ellie's breath in her lungs. It was the first time Noah had voluntarily mentioned his mother since arriving. "Your mommy was sad to leave you?" she asked carefully, not wanting to lead or pressure him. Noah nodded, absently stroking Hop's worn ear. "Mommy cry. Say Noah be good, be brave. New mommy coming." "New mommy?" Ellie echoed, heart racing. "Did she tell you who?" "Lady with horses," Noah said simply, returning his attention to the photo album as if the conversation held no special significance. "Noah stay with horse lady." The revelation sent Ellie's thoughts spinning. Noah's mother hadn't randomly abandoned him. She had specifically chosen the horse lady as his new caregiver. But how had she known about Ellie? Why would she believe a stranger would willingly take in her child? The questions multiplied without answers, but one fact emerged with crystal clarity. Noah had been deliberately placed with her, not randomly abandoned. The knowledge shifted something fundamental in Ellie's understanding of the situation and her own role in it. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted her racing thoughts. Through the rain-streaked window, she recognized Kate's official vehicle, accompanied by an unfamiliar sedan that likely belonged to County Social Services. "Visitors," she told Noah, working to keep her voice light despite the dread pooling in her stomach. "Let's go say hello." Kate's expression as she stepped onto the porch confirmed Ellie's fears. This wasn't a casual check-in, but an official visit with consequences. Beside her stood a younger woman in professional attire, carrying a briefcase that might as well have been labeled government intervention. "Ellie," Kate greeted her, water dripping from her uniform hat. "This is Diane Blackwood from Child Protective Services. She needs to speak with you about Noah." The formal introduction set the tone for what followed. Inside, while Noah played with his trucks in the adjoining room, Diane explained the preliminary findings of their investigation in the detached language of bureaucracy. "We found no missing child reports matching Noah's description within a 5-county radius," she stated, consulting her notes. "No hospital records of a birth matching his approximate age and physical characteristics in our accessible databases. We're working with state authorities to widen the search, but for now, we're classifying this as a clear case of child abandonment." "Which means what, exactly?" Ellie asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Standard protocol requires placement in an approved foster home while the search for family continues," Diane explained. "I've arranged emergency placement with the Bennetts in Lakeside. They're experienced foster parents with an excellent track record, currently caring for 2 other children under 5. The Bennetts. Ellie knew them by reputation, a kind, stable couple in their 40s who had fostered dozens of children. Over the years, by all objective measures, they represented a better placement than a single woman with a struggling ranch and no childcare experience. Yet the thought of Noah being taken to strangers, separated from the tentative security he'd established over the past 3 days, felt like a physical blow. "He's settled here," Ellie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He's already experienced one traumatic separation. Is it really in his best interest to move him again?" Diane's expression softened slightly, suggesting she wasn't entirely immune to the human dimensions of her professional role. "I understand your concern, Miss Caldwell, but temporary attachment is part of the fostering process. The Bennetts are trained to handle transition trauma." Before Ellie could respond, Noah appeared in the doorway, truck in one hand and hop clutched in the other. His expression suggested he'd somehow sensed the conversation's significance despite not understanding the specific content. "Noah, stay." With Ellie, he announced with surprising firmness for a 2-year-old. "Horse Lady is new mommy." The declaration landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of silence through the room. Diane recovered first, her professional mask slipping, to reveal genuine surprise. "Noah, honey," she said, voice gentling as she addressed the child directly. "Do you remember your mommy? The lady who brought you to the barn?" Noah nodded solemnly. "Mommy's sad. Mommy's sick. Say Noah stay with Horse Lady now." Kate and Diane exchanged glances loaded with unspoken significance. Ellie found herself holding her breath, afraid to interrupt what felt like a crucial moment of revelation. "Did your mommy tell you the Horse Lady's name?" Kate asked, crouching to Noah's eye level. Noah frowned in concentration, then shook his head. "Just Horse Lady. Mommy show picture." He pointed to the refrigerator where Ellie realized with a jolt. A local newspaper article about the ranch had been displayed for years, a feature on their planned therapeutic riding program that included a photo of Ellie with the horses. "I think," Kate said carefully, "we need to reconsider the situation." What followed was a conversation that alternated between bureaucratic caution and human empathy. Diane, while bound by regulations, was clearly affected by Noah's direct statement about his mother's intentions. Kate, with her deeper knowledge of community dynamics, advocated for flexibility within the system's constraints. Emergency kinship placement exists for situations where biological family members can care for a child. During investigation periods, Kate argued. While Ms. Caldwell isn't biologically related, the mother's clear intent creates a quasi-kinship. That could justify extended emergency placement. It's irregular, Diane admitted, but not without precedent in cases where a parent has specifically designated a caregiver. The negotiation continued while Noah, apparently satisfied that he had made his position clear, returned to his toys in the living room. Ellie found herself simultaneously hopeful and terrified, wanting desperately to keep Noah safe with her, yet acutely aware of her own limitations as a potential parent. If temporary placement is approved, Diane finally said, there would be conditions. Home safety inspections, parenting classes, regular check-ins, financial stability verification. The works, Miss Caldwell. I understand, Ellie replied, willing to agree to anything that would prevent Noah from being moved again. And I want to be very clear, Diane continued, her expression serious. This would be temporary 90 days maximum while we continue searching for biological family. If relatives are located, they would have priority consideration. If none are found, permanent placement decisions would involve court hearings, potential adoption eligibility assessment, and consideration of all available placement options. The warning was clear: temporary placement didn't guarantee permanent custody. Noah could still be moved elsewhere if the system determined another home was more suitable. I understand, Ellie repeated, though her heart constricted at the possibility. Kate had remained silent during Diane's explanation, but now she spoke with the authority of her position. I'll personally vouch for Ellie's character and capability. This ranch has been in her family for generations. She has strong community support, demonstrated ability to provide appropriate care, and most importantly, Noah himself has expressed clear preference for remaining in her care. The sheriff's endorsement carried weight, tipping the balance of Diane's professional assessment. After another 30 minutes of form-filling provisional agreements and scheduling of follow-up visits, a tentative resolution emerged. Noah would remain with Ellie for 90 days as an emergency placement while the search for biological family continued. After the officials departed, Ellie found herself standing in the kitchen, stunned by the day's developments. 3 days had somehow transformed into 90 still temporary, still uncertain, but a reprieve that allowed her to breathe again. Noah appeared beside her, seemingly unaffected by the bureaucratic drama that had just determined his immediate future. Rain stopped, he announced. See horses now? The simple request grounded Ellie in the present moment, reminding her that while adults worried about procedures and paperwork, children lived in a more immediate reality of wants and needs and simple pleasures. Yes, she agreed, taking his small hand in hers. Let's go see the horses. Outside, the world held the freshly washed clarity that follows summer rain. Puddles reflected a sky clearing to blue, and rainbow fragments appeared and disappeared as sunlight caught lingering droplets. Noah splashed through puddles with the uninhibited joy only very young children possess, his laughter echoing across the ranch yard. At the paddock fence, Thunder greeted them with a soft nickering that prompted Noah's delighted giggle. Marigold and the other horses gathered nearby, drawn by the child's excitement in a way that struck Ellie as almost protective. Horses happy, Noah declared, reaching through the fence to pat Thunder's velvety nose. Noah happy too. Ellie happy? The question caught her off guard with its perceptiveness. Was she happy? The emotion seemed too simple to encompass the complex mixture of hope, fear, and unexpected purpose that had entered her life with this child. Yes, she said finally, realizing it was true despite the uncertainty that still loomed. Ellie is happy too. Noah nodded as if this confirmed something important, then turned his attention back to the horses, launching into a detailed explanation to Thunder about the truck waiting back in the house. Ellie watched him, marveling at the resilience of Children, their ability to accept change, to form new attachments, to find joy in simple moments despite circumstances that would devastate many adults. 90 days stretched before them like an unexplored country, full of possibilities both wonderful and terrifying. Would Noah's mother be found? Would biological relatives appear to claim him? Would the system ultimately decide that Ellie, single, financially stretched, emotionally scarred, wasn't suitable for permanent placement? The questions had no immediate answers, but watching Noah's animated conversation with Thunder, Ellie made a silent promise to herself and to this child who had unexpectedly entered her life. Whatever time they had together, 90 days or a lifetime, she would ensure it was filled with security, joy, and the steadfast love this remarkable little boy deserved. As sunset painted the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold, Ellie and Noah sat on the porch steps sharing ice cream Ruby had mysteriously included with their shopping the previous day. The simple pleasure of cold sweetness on a warm evening, of Noah's chocolate-smeared smile and running commentary on passing butterflies, crystallized something Ellie had been struggling to articulate even to herself. This child, abandoned by circumstance but not by love, had somehow awakened parts of her she'd thought permanently extinguished after Jack's death. The capacity for joy, the ability to see beauty in ordinary moments, the courage to imagine a future beyond mere survival. Noah stay forever? He asked suddenly, his amber eyes serious as they met hers. The question held more complexity than he could possibly understand, but Ellie found herself answering with the only truth that mattered. In this moment, "I hope so," she said, gathering him close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I really hope so." 87 days into their 90-day placement, Ellie stood in the doorway of what had once been the guest room but now unmistakably belonged to Noah. The walls, once bare, now displayed his artwork, colorful scribbles that had evolved into recognizable horses and people as his fine motor skills developed under Ellie's patient guidance. The bookshelf that had held Jack's old fishing magazines now overflowed with picture books, each one read so many times that Noah could recite most from memory. Toys occupied specific places according to Noah's organizational system, which made perfect sense to him and remained a delightful mystery to Ellie. In the center of it all, Noah slept peacefully, one arm thrown above his head, the other still, clutching Hop despite the menagerie of stuffed animals that had joined his family over the past months. His dark curls had grown longer, forming a halo against the pillow of the big boy bed he had graduated to with such pride. 3 days remained before their temporary arrangement faced official review. 72 hours until a judge would determine whether Noah stayed with Ellie permanently or entered the traditional foster system while the search for biological family continued. The thought sent a familiar anxiety coursing through Ellie's chest. 87 days had transformed both their lives in ways she couldn't have imagined when she first found a frightened toddler hiding in her barn. Noah had evolved from a traumatized, abandoned child into a secure, thriving little boy whose laughter filled spaces that had been silent for too long. The ranch itself seemed to have responded to his presence, productivity increasing alongside Ellie's renewed sense of purpose. Preparing for the custody hearing had consumed every spare moment of the past month. Financial records were organized to demonstrate stability despite the ranch's modest profits. Character references had been collected from community members, ranging from Ruby at the general store to Dr. Matthews, who had become Noah's pediatrician. Kate had submitted detailed reports documenting Noah's successful adjustment and Ellie's responsible caregiving. Miguel and Carmen had been particularly helpful, providing childcare during Ellie's mandatory parenting classes and sharing wisdom from raising 3 sons and numerous grandchildren. Even the previously silent neighbor on the north property, old Mr. Peterson, had written a gruff but supportive letter describing how he'd observed Ellie teaching Noah to respect property boundaries and animal safety. Yet despite this support, Uncertainty haunted the edges of Ellie's thoughts. The investigation into Noah's origins had yielded frustratingly little concrete information. No mother had come forward to claim him or explain her actions. No family members had been identified through the expanding search of records across 3 states. The note remained their primary connection to Noah's past 7 words that had forever changed both their lives. Tomorrow morning would bring their final meeting with Diane from Child Protective Services before the hearing. The pressure to prove herself worthy of permanent custody felt overwhelming at times, especially during the quiet night hours when doubts crept in like shadows. A small sound from Noah's bed drew Ellie from her anxious thoughts. He had rolled over, face scrunching briefly before relaxing again into peaceful sleep. The simple sight of him safe, content, belonging steadied something inside her. Whatever happened in the courtroom, these months together had healed parts of both of them that might otherwise have remained broken forever. "We'll be okay," she whispered, a promise to herself as much as to him. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Morning arrived with the golden light peculiar to early autumn in Montana, a clarity that turned ordinary scenes into paintings worthy of gallery walls. Noah woke with his usual enthusiasm, chattering about horses and breakfast plans before his feet even touched the floor. His resilience continued to amaze Ellie, especially his ability to live fully in the present moment, despite the uncertainty surrounding his future. They moved through their established morning routine, feeding animals, collecting eggs from increasingly productive chickens, checking fence lines that had been systematically repaired over the past months. What had once been solitary chores had become shared adventures, Noah's questions and observations transforming mundane tasks into opportunities for discovery. "Look, Ellie, chicken gave us 7 eggs today," he announced, carefully placing each one in the basket with concentration that made his tongue peek out between his lips. "That's the most ever." "You're right," she agreed, marveling at his developing counting skills. "Should we make a special breakfast to celebrate? Pancakes with faces," he declared, this being his current favorite morning treat. Simple pancakes decorated with fruit to create expressions that Noah found endlessly hilarious. Back at the house, they worked together on breakfast preparation, Noah standing on his special step stool to help mix batter and arrange blueberry smiles. On cooking pancakes, his competence in the kitchen had grown alongside other skills. He could now identify most of the herbs in Jenny's rejuvenated garden, help groom the gentler horses with minimal supervision, and operate the hose with impressive responsibility. For a child his age, watching him carefully place strawberry slices for pancake eyes, Ellie felt the familiar mixture of pride and anxiety that had become her constant companion. In less than 72 hours, a stranger in a black robe would decide whether this child, who now knew which cabinet held the pancake griddle and how Ellie liked her coffee, would remain in the home where he so clearly belonged. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted breakfast cleanup. Through the kitchen window, Ellie recognized Diane's sensible sedan, but the unfamiliar black SUV behind it sent a spike of concern through her chest. Unscheduled visitors rarely brought good news in situations like theirs. "Looks like Ms. Diane is early," she told Noah, working to keep her voice casual. "And she's brought someone with her." Noah, who had grown comfortable with Diane during her regular visits, simply nodded and continued drying the plastic cup he'd been tasked with. "Can I show her my new truck drawing?" "Of course," Ellie assured him, grateful for his uncomplicated acceptance of the social worker's presence. "Let's go greet our visitors." Diane's expression as she approached the porch carried a professional neutrality that revealed nothing about the purpose of this unscheduled visit. Beside her walked a woman perhaps 10 years younger than Ellie, dressed in the practical fashion of someone who prioritized function over style. Dark jeans, boots suitable for uneven terrain, and a light jacket despite the warm morning. "Good morning, Ellie," Diane said, her tone carefully modulated. I apologize for arriving earlier than planned. This is Teresa Mendoza. She's asked to speak with you regarding Noah. The introduction sent ice through Ellie's veins. Teresa Mendoza. The surname matched Noah's complexion and dark curls. Was this a relative? Someone with biological claim to the child who had become the center of Ellie's world. Hello, Ellie managed, fighting to maintain composure for Noah's sake. Please, come in. Noah, always sensitive to emotional undercurrents, pressed against Ellie's leg as the visitors entered the house. His earlier enthusiasm dampened to watchful caution, eyes moving between the adults with growing concern. Noah, Diane said gently, crouching to his level, Miss Teresa has come a long way to talk about something important. Would it be okay if... She spoke with Ellie while you and I look at some of your drawings? The distraction technique was transparent but effective. Noah's wariness gave way to pride at the opportunity to showcase his artistic development. I made horses, he informed Diane with renewed confidence, and a rainbow truck. Want to see? As Diane followed Noah to the living room where his artwork was displayed, Teresa remained in the kitchen with Ellie, her expression unreadable. Up close, Ellie could see the resemblance to Noah, the same amber-flecked eyes, similar bone structure in the face. The connection was undeniable, sending waves of preemptive grief through Ellie's heart. You've done well with him, Teresa said. Finally, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested Spanish as her first language. He seems happy. He is happy, Ellie confirmed, unable to keep defensive edges from her tone. He's thriving here. Teresa nodded slowly, her gaze moving around the kitchen, where evidence of Noah's presence was everywhere, artwork magnetized to the refrigerator, child-sized utensils drying in the dish rack, the step-stool pushed against the counter where he had helped with breakfast. I've been looking for them for almost 3 months, Teresa said, the statement landing between them like a physical object. My sister and her son. Sister, not mother. The distinction registered through Ellie's anxiety, offering a momentary reprieve from her worst fears. Your sister left Noah in my barn during a thunderstorm, Ellie said, fighting to keep accusation from her voice. With nothing but pajamas and a note asking me to love him. Teresa's composure cracked slightly, grief flashing across her features before she regained control. I know, and I'm not here to defend what she did, though I understand why she felt. It was necessary. Why don't you explain it to me? Ellie suggested, gesturing toward the kitchen table. Because I've spent 87 days trying to understand how a mother could abandon her child that way. They sat across from each other, 2 women connected by a child neither had expected to shape their lives. Teresa's hands calloused, in patterns that suggested physical labor twisted together on the tabletop, her wedding ring catching morning light from the window. My sister Elena was diagnosed with aggressive cervical cancer last spring, she began, voice steady despite the painful subject. Single mother, no health insurance, working agricultural jobs that barely covered rent. By the time symptoms became impossible to ignore, the cancer had already spread. The familiar pattern of healthcare delayed by poverty until treatable. Conditions became terminal. Ellie had seen it before in rural communities where medical access remained a luxury rather than a right. She refused treatment initially, Teresa continued. Said she couldn't afford to be sick when Noah needed her. By the time she accepted help, doctors gave her weeks, not months. Ellie thought of the note. Please love him like I couldn't, understanding. Now that it hadn't been a statement of emotional inability, but of imminent physical impossibility. I was working in California when she was diagnosed, Teresa explained. Seasonal contract, couldn't leave without losing the income my own children depended on. Elena promised she'd wait for me to return, that we'd figure out arrangements for Noah together. Her voice caught slightly. She didn't wait. Why here? Ellie asked the question that had haunted her for months. Why my ranch? Teresa reached into her pocket, removing a worn newspaper clipping, the same article that had been magnetized to Ellie's refrigerator for years. Elena worked the Peterson apple harvest 2 seasons ago. Noah was just a baby. Your therapeutic writing program was featured in the county paper. She kept this, talked about bringing Noah for lessons someday when he was older. The connection hit Ellie with unexpected force. A program that had never fully launched due to Jack's death and her subsequent withdrawal had nonetheless created a beacon of hope for a dying mother seeking safe harbor for her child. When the pain got worse, when she knew she wouldn't survive until my contract ended, she became fixated on finding Noah a home where he could have what she couldn't provide: stability, safety, connection to the natural world she valued. Teresa's gaze met Ellie's directly. She chose you, Miss Caldwell, specifically and deliberately. Not random abandonment, a desperate mother's final act of love. The revelation silenced Ellie completely. All these months, she had framed the abandonment as something done to Noah, a trauma inflicted by parental failure. Teresa's explanation reframed it entirely: a mother's ultimate sacrifice, choosing her child's future well-being over her own need for final moments together. Where is she now? Ellie asked finally, though she already suspected the answer. Elena died 6 weeks ago, Teresa confirmed quietly. Hospice care in Missoula. She refused to tell anyone where Noah was, afraid he'd be taken before you had time to bond with him. It took me this long to track the timeline, follow her movements, and find where she'd left him. The information settled between them, reshaping everything Ellie thought she knew about Noah's story. After a moment, Teresa reached into her bag and withdrew an envelope. "This is why I came," she said, placing it on the table between them. Elena's final wishes, legally notarized before her death. She named you Ellie Caldwell of Whispering Pines Ranch as Noah's guardian. She also left this for him to be given when he's older. The second envelope was smaller, sealed with wax and old-fashioned style, Noah's name written across the front. In careful script. A mother's final words to the son she wouldn't see grow up. "I don't understand," Ellie said, staring at the documents that had appeared like miracles on her kitchen table. "If you're his aunt, don't you want custody? He's your blood family." Teresa's smile held sadness but also certainty. "I have 4 children of my own, Miss Caldwell. My husband works construction jobs that move us every few months. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment when we're not following seasonal work." She gestured around the kitchen. "Noah deserves this stability, space, connection to one place. Elena saw that possibility here with you." "But the hearing," Ellie began, mind racing to incorporate this new information. "That's why we're here today," Diane interjected, rejoining the conversation as she returned from the living room. "Teresa has submitted formal documentation supporting your petition for permanent custody. As Noah's closest biological relative, her endorsement carries significant weight with the court." Hope bloomed dangerous and bright in Ellie's chest. "What does this mean for the hearing?" "It means," Diane said with the first genuine smile Ellie had seen from her, "that instead of evaluating continued temporary placement, the judge will likely be approving permanent legal guardianship, possibly with expedited adoption options if that's the path you choose to pursue." The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis, reality rearranging itself around this unexpected resolution. After months of uncertainty, of preparing for battles that might tear Noah from the home he'd come to love, the path forward had suddenly cleared. "Noah deserves to know his heritage," Teresa added. "His mother's culture, his family history. I'm not asking for custody, but I would like to remain connected. To be the aunt who visits, who helps him understand where he came from, even as he builds his future here." The request was so reasonable, so clearly motivated by genuine care for Noah's well-being, that Ellie found herself nodding without hesitation. "Of course, he should know his family, his history. You'll always be welcome here." A small sound from the doorway alerted them to Noah's presence. He stood watching the adult conversation with the solemn attention he brought to matters he sensed were important. Hop clutched against his chest in what Ellie had come to recognize as his self-comfort gesture. "Noah," Ellie said gently, "this is Miss Teresa. She's your aunt, your mommy's sister." His eyes widened, gaze moving to Teresa with new interest. "You knew my mommy?" Teresa nodded, visibly fighting emotion as she addressed her nephew directly for the first time. "Yes, Noah. I knew your mommy very well. She loved you very much." "Mommy went away," Noah stated, the simple fact delivered without the raw grief it might have carried months earlier. "She was sick." "Yes," Teresa confirmed. "She was very sick. But she made sure you would have a good home with Ellie and the horses. She wanted you to be happy here." Noah processed this information with the particular thoughtfulness he brought to important matters. "I am happy here," he concluded finally, moving to stand beside Ellie's chair in a gesture of both seeking and offering reassurance. The moment crystallized everything that had developed between them: the trust, the belonging, the family they had become despite circumstances that might have broken lesser spirits. Ellie wrapped her arm around Noah's small shoulders, drawing strength from his presence, even as she offered security in return. The rest of the morning unfolded with a dreamlike quality. Paperwork explained and signed, photographs shared of Elena and the extended family Noah would now have the opportunity to know, plans made for future visits that would bridge his past and present. Through it all, Noah remained close to Ellie, occasionally venturing closer to Teresa when she produced pictures of cousins near his age or shared stories about his mother's childhood. By early afternoon, the official business concluded. Teresa prepared to leave with promises to return after the hearing with family photos and mementos Elena had saved from Noah's babyhood. At the door, she paused, turning to Ellie with an expression of profound gratitude. "Elena would be so happy," she said quietly, knowing he found not just safety but love. A mother who cherishes him as her own. The words, "a mother," settled into Ellie's heart, naming what she had become without fully acknowledging it. Not a temporary caregiver or emergency placement, but a mother who would shape this child's life through all the years ahead. "Thank you," Ellie replied, emotion making her voice rough, "for finding us, for understanding, for giving us your blessing." As Teresa's vehicle disappeared down the long driveway, Noah tugged at Ellie's hand with newfound excitement. "Can we tell the horses?" he asked, eyes bright with the resilient joy that continued to amaze her. "Tell them I'm staying forever?" "Yes," Ellie agreed, letting him pull her toward the barn where their journey had begun 87 days earlier. The horses should definitely be the first to know. Thunder greeted them at the paddock fence with the particular nickering he reserved for Noah, seeming to understand the child's elevated excitement. The other horses gathered nearby, drawn by Noah's animated energy as he announced his news. "I get to stay forever," he informed them seriously, "with Ellie and all the animals. Aunt Teresa said so." Watching him communicate his joy to creatures who had become his confidants and playmates, Ellie felt the last pieces of uncertainty dissolve. The path ahead would hold challenges, integrating Teresa's family into their lives, eventually explaining Elena's choices to Noah when he was old enough to understand, navigating the ordinary difficulties of raising a child as a single parent. But those challenges would be faced from the solid foundation they had built together over the past months. Noah would grow up surrounded by horses and open skies, knowing both the family of his birth and the family of his heart. The ranch that had been dying slowly under the weight of Ellie's grief had found new purpose, new energy, new life through a child who needed exactly what she had to give. That evening, as stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Ellie and Noah sat on the porch swing that had been Jack's final project before his death. The gentle rhythmic movement, the night sounds of the ranch settling for sleep, and Noah's warm Weight against her side created a moment of perfect contentment. "Ellie?" Noah's voice was drowsy with approaching sleep. "Was my first mommy brave?" The question caught her off guard, but Ellie answered with the truth as she now understood. Yes, sweetheart. Your first mommy was incredibly brave. Loving someone sometimes means making really hard choices because you want what's best for them, even when it hurts your own heart. Noah considered this with the serious attention he brought to important concepts. Like when you let me ride. Thunder even though it scares you a little? The comparison, childlike but perceptive, made Ellie smile. Something like that, but much bigger. Your mommy loved you so much that she found you a forever home where you could be happy and safe, even though it meant she couldn't be with you. And now you're my forever mommy, Noah stated with absolute certainty, snuggling closer as his eyes grew heavy. The words settled into Ellie's heart, naming the transformation that had occurred since that stormy night when a desperate mother's last act of love had delivered a child to her barn. Not just any child, but this specific, remarkable little boy who had somehow healed grief she'd thought permanent. "Yes," she whispered as Noah drifted toward sleep beneath the same stars that had witnessed his arrival. "I'm your forever mommy now." 3 days later, in a courthouse filled with friends and neighbors who had supported their journey, a judge made official what their hearts had already recognized. Noah Mendoza Caldwell legally became Ellie's son, his dual surname honoring both. The mother who had loved him enough to let him go, and the mother who would raise him through all the years ahead. As they left the courthouse, community members lined the steps in impromptu celebration. Ruby from the general store presented Noah with a cowboy hat sized perfectly for his small head. Miguel and Carmen brought a handmade quilt embroidered with horses and Noah's new initials. Kate, who had bravely bent rules when a child's welfare demanded flexibility, offered a hand-carved wooden badge declaring him official junior ranch hand. Even Mr. Peterson, notorious for avoiding social gatherings, appeared briefly to present Noah with a puppy from his prized cattle dog's recent litter, a gesture that left both Noah and Ellie speechless with surprise and gratitude. The ranch that welcomed them home that evening was no longer a monument to solitude, but a vibrant working operation with renewed purpose. Fences had been repaired, outbuildings restored, gardens replanted with herbs and vegetables that would feed them through winter. The therapeutic writing program, Jack's Dream and Elena's Hope, had been revived with Noah as its first enthusiastic participant. Ellie stood on the porch watching Noah introduce his new puppy to the horses, his confident movements around the large animals demonstrating how completely he belonged in this life they now shared. The note that had accompanied him that stormy night was preserved in a frame alongside Elena's photograph, a testament to a mother's final act of love that had healed 2 broken hearts. In the distance, sunset painted Montana skies with colors no artist could fully capture, promising another day of possibilities tomorrow. The emptiness that had hollowed Ellie's existence for 6 long years had been filled with something she hadn't dared to imagine, not replacement for what was lost, but new love, new purpose, new family created from courage and sacrifice, and the remarkable resilience of a child who had taught her heart to hope again. "Come on, Mama," Noah called, waving from the paddock where his puppy danced excited circles around his boots. "Thunder wants to show Ranger how to be a ranch dog." "Coming, sweetheart," Ellie called back, moving toward her son, her miracle, with the certainty of someone who had found her way home after years of wandering. The note had changed everything, but the love that grew from that desperate beginning had transformed them both in ways that would continue unfolding through all the years ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.